library as such. But as our application grows, when we have a lot of components in place and we have to kind of like pass data from apps to different components, from parent to child, and it's a lot of nested components that we have within, that's when maintaining this state or this data can become really um, uh, I mean, it can become a really a tedious job to do, right? So this is where the state management becomes really helpful. Okay. Okay. So yep, I have been made the co-host now. Okay. So do you all see my screen?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So I have kind of like just gone to the official site of Vuex over here. And as I was saying, what is Vuex? It's nothing but a state management pattern, right? Or a library which we need to integrate, we can integrate into our Vue.js application. So I'll just kind of like run you down to one of the diagrams. So when we think of an application, right? So we can always think of an application having these three main parts or components. So we have a view, we have our action and a state. So it's a one-way flow. So depending on the state, we see what is rendered on the screen, the view, and again, depending on user inputs or necessary actions that we have to take, right? We have to initiate some actions. So this is how ideally the parts of our application would look like. And I just want to show you another diagram, this diagram, and this will make much more sense. So this is how we kind of like can plug in our Vuex over here. So essentially we have a state. So you can think of your state like the data, right? So just imagine we have an application and we have many of the components kind of like sharing a common state or a common, they are kind of like sharing this common data between them, right? So the state of that application would depend or the view of that application would depend on that particular state, right? So depending on the state is how the components are kind of like rendered onto the screen. And depending on our components need, again, we go ahead and take some actions. So this action can be kind of like we kind of like calling a API call or making some backend calls and stuff. And that in turn would require to change the state, right? So this is the diagram that we'll just kind of like keep in mind while we are working on the state application today. So now, before we move on to state management and kind of like see how this comes into play, just wanted to understand or wanted you to kind of like tell me, normally when we go ahead and write our application now, how does the data flow happen when we want to kind of like share some information between a parent and a component? How do we do that? Through use of
Events.
yeah, so from parent to child components, it's through props, right? And from the child to the parent, that's where we kind of like bring in the events or the emit out the events,
Uh,
right? Clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so it's basically through props and events that this exchange of data or exchange of states happen. So how does Vue.js makes it very helpful is that we just have one centralized store now. Okay, so from that centralized store, all the components within the application have access to the store. So this to and for exchange of data, it becomes very much more easy, right? And the best thing about it is we have a dev tool And through this step tool, like say we have a deeply nested components in our application, and somewhere the states are going wrong and all, so we can keep a track of it through the dev tool. So today what we are going to do is we are going to create a simple application. Let's say we'll kind of like have application to kind of like check out products. We'll kind of like create a page where we have a number of products, and we just want to kind of like see how those products can be kind of like sent forth between our applications, right? So let's say this is our main page, and we would, I'm just kind of like creating a wireframe so that we have in mind what is it exactly that we are trying to create today. So this is our main app kind of where we'll kind of like see the number of items that are added to a cart. And we will have a component which is going to kind of like show us the list of products that we have in there. So let's say we have a sub component in there where we are going to see our product list. Okay. And obviously we would want to show our products out here, right? So let's say these are our products. And as and when the customer kind of like adds something to their cart, so we'll have a button over here. And on the click of this button, obviously, we'll give the user an option to kind of like choose a number of items that they would want to add to their cart. And on the click of the add button, let's say, we want that the cart total should get incremented out here. So normally, how would have we done this? We would have had our app data in the main instance of our view, and that information we would have passed through to this child component via props, right? So via props, we would have kind of like passed on the information down to the child component. And when this addition of items are happening over here, to reflect back that number over here, we would have had to emit back some kind of like event so that we are able to see that information back here, right? So this is how we would normally do it, through props and through events. So now what we are trying to do is we are trying to get into place something called as a state management. So with the state management, what is allowed according to the Vuex framework is that we can have only one store. That's kind of like a centralized place where we can kind of like hold all our states and all the methods around it. And we will see how we can make use of that. Okay. So out here, let me just open this application. So in order to make use of Vuex, we need to kind of like include the script out here. So our Vuex script, and the rest of it obviously remains the same. So what we are going to do, we'll just go ahead and create a view component out here. So let's say a new view. So any questions till this point, by the way, before we get started with the coding part? I assume that's no questions till this point. Okay, so let's go forward and let's see like how things roll out. So I'm kind of like creating this element app, and obviously in our index.html, we are going to create a div, and let's associate this ID app to it, so that whatever happens within our view instance, we kind of like see it in this part of our HTML, right? Okay. So now with our store in place, we can have a centralized store, which is accessible to the view instance and all its associated child components. right? All the components within that application. So I'll just go ahead and create a store. So how do we create a store? So we say new vuex.store, right? Okay. So this store mainly has four parts to it, right? So one is we have our states. So you can think of the states as the data, right? The data that we use to hold in our view. We have something called as getters. So we'll come to all these things in a while. Then we have our mutations. Then we also have our actions. Now, how does our app instance get a hold of all these state getters mutations? So we kind of like have to include that in our app. So we say store colon. Okay. So now in our so what we want to create now is that we want to have a list of products, and we want to also see the total number of items that are being added to this cart, right? So let's just kind of like create our states over here. So now instead of kind of like having that data inside this view instance, I'm kind of like directly putting into the state, right? So where do we put this? So let me call it cart underscore total, and we'll give it an initial value of 0. And products for now, let's just have it as an empty list. Okay. So now comes the question is as to how do we get this information, right? So we have cart.total over here inside the centralized store. So how do we get this information in our app, and how do we use it, right? So for that, what Vuex tells us is that we cannot, to kind of like access the state, we have to make use of this store that we have declared over here, right? So we can, and so whenever this value changes, we want that that value should kind of like reflect in our app. So the thing about the Vuex store is that it's centralized, it's reactive, right? So whenever any changes happen in the state, if any of the components are using it, it should be directly available to all those components as well. So out here, let's just try to use this, right? So let's say in our app over here, we want to kind of like go ahead and use it. So I'm just opening a H2 component, and we want to kind of like see the number of items in our store. Let's say I will go about it with the cart, total.cart. Okay. So I save this. Now over here to get access of this particular cart underscore total, we have to use something called as state dot followed by the name of that state, right? And we can get access of it through our computed properties out here. So I'll just kind of like create a computed property. I could name it differently. So I'll just keep the same name as I'm using over here. So name the total card. Okay, so I'll just take it from here. Now, what do I want over here? I want this information over here, right? The items that we have inside this cart. So how do we get that information? So we have to get that information with this dollar store dot state dot the state name, which is nothing but a cart dot total. Okay, so let's save this and let's see if we are getting it. Okay, so you see that we are getting that value over here, right? So we are getting 0 out here. So if I go ahead and change this, save it, we see that that's kind of like reactive and it is getting reflected over here. Okay, so we'll change this back to 0. Now, let's just quickly kind of like create a product list. So let's say we have some fruits in our store. So I'll just go ahead and give it a ID. We will give some name to this. So let's say we have apples in our store and we want some price associated with it. So let's say 120 per kilo. I'll just kind of like go ahead and create a few more products as well. So any questions till here? Okay. Um, so till here, what have we done? So we have created a centralized place where we can have all our data, all our states, and we can kind of like go ahead and access this data using this dot store dot state followed by that state name, right? So now we have a car total here. We have our products over here. So let's say we kind of like want some derived information out of this whole thing, right? So let's say we just want to kind of like find out the number of items that are there over here. So I do not have to write another, declare another state. In fact, I can just kind of like compute that thing from the information that we already have over here. So all those kind of things is what we can put into our getters. So getters are again like within this we can have methods or handlers which can kind of like give us some kind of derived information out of our states, right? So let's say we want to kind of like know the total number of items that are there in our product list. So what we can do over here is that we can kind of like directly write a method over here or a handler over here. Let me just call it product total. So this is going to get state as a parameter because it needs to use the state to do its calculations and stuff, right? And what is it that we want to do over here? We just want to kind of like it to return the total number of products that we have over here. So again, it has the state, right? So we just say state followed by the name of the state. And in this case, we just want the length, right? I mean, what's the length of the array? So, yeah. Now, how do we get this information in our app? Again, we can get that information through a computed property. So let's say we want it to be called as product total. Now, where do we get it? So we have to write return. And in order to get that information, just the way that we use this dot store dot state over here, out here we have to use this dot store dot getters followed by the name. And what was the name that we gave over here? We had given it as product total. Okay. So let's just see whether we are getting that information out or not. So in our index.html now, I'll just create a h3 tag and we can say our customers that, okay, go ahead and choose from these many number of products that we have in our store. Okay, and what had we named that? We have named it product underscore total, right? Okay, so let's see if that's reflecting. Yeah. So we are getting that information over here, right? So now I hope it's clear till this point, right? So when we are using a state and when we are using a getter, so state you can think of it as the place where we used to keep our data, right? So normally when we used to create an application, whatever we used to store in our data, we can have it within our state. And getters is kind of like if we want to kind of like derive something out of these states, all those things we can easily compute within a getters. So I mean, if many of the components need this information, that's where it comes in handy. Okay. So is it clear till this point?
Yes,
And
ma'am.
in order to access our store state, we have to use this dot store dot state followed by the state name. And in order to get a hold of our getters, we have to use this dot store dot getters dot product total. Okay. So now we have this in place. Now, if we look back into our wireframe, what is it now we want? We want to create another component, right, called as product list. And within this, we should see all our products listed out. So let's go to that part now. So what we are going to do is we are going to create a new component, right? So I can call it view.component. So the first thing that we need to provide is a component name, right? So I'll just go ahead and call it product list. And then we can kind of like go ahead and mention how we want our template to be, the data, the methods, and all the other things. So let's just go ahead and create a template. And we'll just test out a template. So I'm just creating a div tag. And within this div tag, let's just kind of like have H2 or H3 and just mention product list, right? So we can say that we want to see our product list out here. Okay, so product list. Having done that, now how do I get hold of this product list over here? What do we need to do inside our index.html? So we have created this component with the name product list. Now, if we want to use it in our index.html, we can use it as a tag, right? So we can just simply go ahead and use it and then just self-close it. So I'm just mentioning this component out here. So whatever is within the HTML of that component, that should get rendered out here. And we are getting it out here. So everything is fine and well connected and wired till this point of time, right? Okay. So now what is it that we want? So as I was telling you, when we are declaring things in a store, we do not have the headache of kind of like passing the information from parent to child or from child back to the parent through props and through emitting events and all. So in order to get our information, because we want to kind of like go ahead and show the product list, right? And the product list is where it's over here inside the state called as products. So can any one of you help me how we can get that information over here? What do we need to do? How did we do it over here? What did we do? In order to get cart total over here, what did we do?
We called the computed function.
Exactly. We called a computed, we kind of like had this computed function, and inside this, we simply call this dot store dot state dot cart product, I mean cart total, right? So the same thing we have to do. We have, we'll just go ahead and create a computed property over here. And what is it that we want? We want products, right? So I'll just name it as products. And how do we get hold of that product? What do we need to write? Return. This is the syntax, right? So what do we write? So products, we have it as products over here, right? So what do we use over here? So this store item is accessible to all the components. So accessing it remains the same. Okay. So we still have to use this dot store dot state. Okay, because we want to get hold of that state. And what was the state name? Our state name was products. Got it? Right. So now we have this products over here. So if we want to kind of like, so what do we see? The products is an array over here, correct? So in order to list out our array in our template, which V director can we make use of? Yeah, anyone please? We will have to kind of like iterate through an array and kind of like place that information out here. So which view director can we make use of?
V4 we can use.
Very good, great. So we can make use of a V4, right? And can anyone try to help me with the syntax? So we have it as product. So what do we do over here?
So product in products.
Great. So we can write product in products, right? And okay, so we can just kind of like go ahead and bind it with a certain key. So I'll say key, and since product ID would be unique out here, so let's just kind of like bind it to the product ID. Okay. Now we want to see the names of those products. So we can place product dot name, right? So let's save this and let's see if we are getting the information. And there you go, right? So we have all those apple, banana, orange out here. Okay, so just to make it look a little more good and all, let's just try to give some CSS out here so that it looks decent enough for us to work on. So I'll just kind of like directly try to pull some CSS from here. So let's say we want to use a card. And yeah. Okay, so one of these I think would be good enough for us. Okay, maybe I'll just pull something. Yeah, this should be good enough. Okay, so we will, I mean, just to make it look a little good, nothing else. Hmm, we have a card dot body, and within this the title. So I'll just over here we can give the title as the name that we had, right? So we'll just give it as product dot name, and inside this maybe we can just place in our price part. Let's see if this is good enough. Okay, something. So we can just give it a background color maybe. And we'll change this to a button so that we can kind of like have our add to cart part over here. So till now, what have we covered? We are saying like, okay, how can we place our states, right? So we have to place it within our state. And in order to get access of that state, we have to use this dot store dot state. And in order to get access to our getters, we have to use this dot state dot getters. So add to cart maybe. And we'll just quickly give some color to it, and then we should get going. So let's see a background color. Um, So any questions till this point of time? Yes, it is tagged so that it doesn't come one below the other. We can have all in one line. Okay. Now take the color reset. So anyone, any questions till here? Anyways, we'll leave that and we'll just add a rupees kind of thing over here. Rupees per kilo. Okay, so now let's say that we will just go ahead and add a button and we want to change the prices in this particular state over here. So the thing about using Vuex is that we can keep a track as to how these states are maintained, who is trying to change the value of the state, and so on. Because I mean, when you think of it from a point of view of a huge application, wherein a lot of components are trying to use the same state, it becomes very important over there that we understand who is trying to change the state and how. So to make those things easy, what does Vuex tell us? Vuex tells us that we should change the state only through a mutation. Okay, so we cannot go ahead and directly change the state. Of course, JavaScript does allow you to do that. You can still do that. But the thing is that we want that our dev tool should keep a track as to which method or which component has been changing the state. So in order to do that, all those state changes has to happen in the mutations. So inside our mutation, we can have as many methods or handlers as we want, and only through those methods and handlers should we go ahead and change any of the values that we have stored out here. So does that make sense? So through JavaScript, probably we can still go ahead and directly change the state, but in order to keep a track as to who is changing the states, which component, how it's getting changed, we should always, as a practice, try to do it through methods that we have in our mutation. Okay, so now let's see how we can do that. So let's say I just want to kind of like go ahead and create a button and what should that button do? Let's say that the button should show us the discounted price of our products, right? So we want a button which on the click of the button, we should be able to see the discounted price for the products that we have in our store. So as we mentioned, we should not directly change our state. So all the state changes should happen through our mutation. So inside our mutation, what we can do is we can go ahead and create a method. So let's say we want to call it apply discount. Right? So this method should be able to go ahead and apply a discount to our products. So this is again going to get state as a parameter. And what is it that we want to do? In our case, let's say we'll just kind of like keep it simple. We would want to reduce the price of each of the items by 10 rupees. So we already have access to state. So we'll just simply mention state dot products. And we want to run through the whole array, right? So I'll just use inbuilt JavaScript method for each. Now it's going to iterate through each of the product that we have in products. And what we want to do, we want to change the price of the product, right? So we'll say product as price. And we'll just kind of like, okay, let's change it by 10 rupees, right? So each of the products should get reduced by 10 rupees whenever we are clicking that button. So that's what we wanted to reflect. Now the question comes, this is the method that we have in our store. So how do we kind of like make use of it in our component or in our main app? So for that, just the way that for states we used to use store.state. So in order to kind of like call a mutation or to kind of like invoke a mutation, we have to call something called as commit. Okay. So I'll just say that at click of this button, we want to kind of like call a method called as discounted price. And what is this discounted price going to do internally? It is going to call the mutation method out there. So we'll have a methods over here. Okay. And what is methods going to do? Methods is going to call that mutation. So how do we call the mutation? We have to say this dot. First we have to get into a store. Then we have to do a commit. Okay. So we have to mention commit, followed by the mutation name. And I think we had named it as apply discounts, right? Yeah, apply discount. Okay, so let's see. So we have this button over here, and I'm just going to kind of like open the console so that we can see that. I'll go into view. So over here, you see we have product, we have a product list, we have those three items out here. And if you look over here, we have this Vuex as well, right? So as you see, in initially, it's saying that this is the base state. If I kind of like open that, it says that this is our base state. We had our cart total as this and all those objects and their prices associated with it. Now, if we click on apply discount price, you see that this is getting updated over here. So our dev tool is saying that, okay, it's calling a mutation method called as apply discount. So that's the same name that we have given to the mutation over here. And it's also kind of like telling us, okay, it's at this time that it was called, right? And it also gives you an option to revert back the mutation or to commit the mutation, right? So if you look at it, if we commit the mutation, we see that the price is getting reduced out here in our store, right? And of course, that same price is getting reflected out here. So originally we had it as 120 and so on. So now it's reduced by 10 rupees each. So any questions till this point? Anything? Is the flow clear till here or any part that you would want me to revisit? So is it clear till this point? So should we move on?
Yeah, ma'am.
So now we have our mutations, and how do we call our mutations? It is through the commit that we can call our mutation, right? So we say this dot store dot commit, and then we go ahead and apply our discount. So if this were, I mean, we were to write this application in a normal way. So ideally, all this data, all this product that we are seeing over here, we would have kind of like declared it somewhere in our main app through our data, right? And we would have had to pass it through a prop to our component out here. And whenever, let's say, we were clicking on discounted price or something, then that information would have had to be emitted back to the parent through a event handler or something like that, right? So with the use of store, we do not have to do any of those things. So this is a centralized place where we have all our states and all the methods associated with that state. So it kind of like makes things really, really, straightforward and easy, right? So whenever we are doing a mutation, we simply have to commit the mutation. And once we commit the mutation, we are allowed to kind of like uh, change the value of the states over here. That's what's going to kind of like reflect in our app out there. And likewise, to get access of our state, we can go through computed properties, and using this.store.state, we can kind of like change that as well. And of course, our getters, whenever we have to kind of like get some kind of derived information of the state that's already existing, that's when we make use of our getters. Okay, so now that we have all this in place, let's say that what did we want as per our wireframe? We want to create a add button, and whenever we are adding a certain amount of products over here, we want that same information to be reflected over here. Right? So let's try to do that part. So anyone, any ideas? How do we go about that? Yeah. So what do you think? What should we do? So first things first, we need to have some place to take that input information, right, from the user. Yeah. So let's say I'll just go ahead and use a input out here, right? And let's say we want it on the same line. Just use a span. And what kind of information do we want? Obviously the quantity kind of thing, right? So we can mention the type as a number. Okay, so let's see if we have got that. Okay, we have that. Now what should we do? So whenever we are adding the amount over here, let's say we say a 2 over here, what do we expect? And we click on this button, what do we want to happen?
Two apples get added to the cart.
Exactly. So we want that this information that we are putting in here, whenever we are clicking this information, that should reflect over here into the cart total. So if you kind of like want to break that down, what does it essentially mean? We have to take this input information over here, and we have on the click of the button, we need to go ahead and change this value over here. So how do we change a state? What do we need to do for that? Can we change a state directly? Or should we change our state directly? What are mutations for? For changing our state, right? So we shouldn't ever directly change our state. So if I need to change this cart total over here, we need to have a mutation or a method which can do that for us, correct? Because we shouldn't directly ever change the state. So we need to have another mutation method which can do that for us. So let's say we will call it as add, just call it the same thing, add to cart, and this will get the state as parameter. Along with that, we need to pass some data to it, right? We need to say like what is the amount that we need to change it by. Correct. So what are we going to do? Simply we need to update the state, right? So whatever the amount that we are getting, we have to say state dot cart underscore total needs to be added, or we need to kind of like just go ahead and add that amount to it, right? So what are you seeing over here? That whenever we are writing a mutation, so we can pass an extra parameter to it. So it is allowed. Okay. So this can take amount. And now depending on that amount, it can change the cart total. So what does that mean? That means that we have a mutation method in place now. And whenever we are clicking on this button, we would want that method to get invoked, right? So we'll add a add click over here, and let's say the method that we want to call in here is add cart. Okay. That means over here we should have a method add cart, and this add cart in turn should call what? How do we invoke a mutation? How did we invoke this apply discount? What did we do for that? Whenever we wanted to apply the discount and kind of like change the value of the product, we have this mutation called as apply discount, right? Now, how did we invoke that? So in order to invoke a mutation, we always have to call commit. Is it clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Yeah. So whenever we have to get hold of a state, it's straightforward, right? This dot store dot state. Whenever we have to kind of like get or invoke any of these getters over here, this dot store dot getters. In order to invoke any of our mutations, it
Huh?
is this dot state dot commit. Okay. So out here, we would require to call a commit, right? So how do we call it? We have to say this dot dollar store dot commit, and what should we give in the parenthesis?
Name of the function.
Perfect. We need to give the name of the mutation, and we have called that add to cart. To cart. Okay. And as you see, we are passing some amount over there, right? So now let's see how we can get that amount and how can we pass that amount. So that means we need to get hold of that number that the user will be entering over here. So let's say 2, 3, whatever the user enters, we should have some way to kind of like capture that amount. So we can make use of a vmodel directive, right? So out here, so let's say I we want to kind of like store it in something called as items, and that item has to be in relation to which product we are adding, right? So I'll just kind of like have it, I mean, as our product ID itself. So what does that again mean? That again means that we need to have some data over here, right? So, and of course, whenever we are having a data within a component, that needs to be a method. Okay. And I'm just having it as a array, a empty array for now. So what are we saying? We are saying that, okay, we do have a centralized store, but if a component needs to have some data which is not going to get used anywhere apart from this component, it is absolutely fine to have that data within the component itself. Okay, so it's not that if you're using a store, you cannot have data within your component. It is absolutely fine as long as this data isn't getting kind of like used by any other component and all. It's totally internal to this particular component. Then obviously it doesn't make sense to kind of like have it here as in the centralized store, in the centralized container. So I'm just kind of like declaring this item in here. And okay, so I'm giving that as a V model. And obviously, I mean, in order to access this particular ID, I need that information over here as well. So I'll just kind of like pass that information as a product.id over here. Okay, so that means I need to accept my ID here. And at the same time, what do we want? We want this information to get passed, right? So we need to give that information over here. So I have to say item and square bracketed this particular ID. Okay, so let's just check it out. Okay, looks like something is going wrong. Let's see what's going wrong. Reference error. Okay, so can anyone help me? Why we're getting this reference error? Can you tell me what I'm doing wrong out here? It's saying that item is not defined. So we have our item here, but I'm not able to reference it here. So what have I done wrong over here?
Ma'am, is it this dot item?
Perfect, right? So we've forgotten this over here. So let's see if that fixes it. Okay, so we are getting it as a 2, but yeah, it looks like something is wrong. Taking it as a string, it looks like, right? So if I add a 3 over here. Okay, yeah. So if you notice, it's taking it as a string, right? So over here, I need to mention that I want it as numbers only. So by default, it's taking it as a string. So let's see if that fixes it. We add 2, so 2 items get added to the cart. We add 3 kilos of banana and we get that added to the cart as well. And if we look into our dev tool, all that information is getting recorded, right? So whenever you are doing an add cart, it's telling you the timestamp at which you do it. And let's say you want to revert back, right? So it allows you to revert this mutation as well. And yeah, and you see that it's gone back to 0, right? Okay. So the whole thing of doing things through our mutation is so that it can get recorded in this dev tool. And we can keep a track as to which component or which method has been, or which mutation method has been invoking all those changes. So it kind of like make things easy to track, especially in a fully functional app where we have a lot of components and all. Keeping data within our view instance or within the view component can get complicated, especially passing data through props, through nested to down to the nested components, or passing or emitting out those events back up. It can become a tedious job. So that is where our view store comes really handy. And as you see over here, right? So it's pretty straightforward. So when you think of a store, you have to think that, okay, your store has a state, your store can have getters, your store has to have mutations in order to change the value of your state. And of course, we have something called as actions as well. So we are going to kind of like touch upon the actions part now. But before we do that, any questions till this point of time? So once you go through those lecture videos and other things, things will get a lot more clear as well. But yeah, I hope it's making sense till this point of time. Or do you have any doubts, any questions, anything that I can clarify? So would any one of you just want to kind of like just go through what we have done till this point of time, like what we should have within our states, what we should have within our getters, mutations, and how do we invoke these? Yes,
Ma'am,
anyone.
for
I mean, it's okay. You can kind of like just volunteer, just kind of like whatever the understanding is till this point of time.
ma'am, basically for getters, we use the dot state and dot the name of the getter to get the value. And for mutators, we need to commit to set the value from the particular component. So these are the two main ways we can set and get it.
Perfect, right? So in our centralized store, we kind of like place all the states or the data within our state. And we obviously have getter methods and we have mutation methods uh, through which we can, I mean, the getters are usually to get some kind of derived information from these states, and the mutations are essentially for changing the state. So, I mean, although it is possible using JavaScript that we can directly change the state, but we should avoid doing it. And in case, to just kind of like allow the whole thing to throw us an error, if we are directly trying to change it, we can use this particular property called as strict, and we can say it as true. So if at all we try to change our mutate, I mean, we directly try to change the value of our state directly from our component, it is going to throw us an error. Okay, so we can add this out here as well, so that we don't kind of like go ahead and make that mistake. Okay, so now mutations, within mutations, whenever we are doing a mutation, it is, I mean, mutations has to be synchronous. Okay, so anything that has to kind of like do things, whether we can kind of like go ahead and fetch something from the API before we change our state, anything that has to be dealt with asynchronously shouldn't be handled within a mutation. So one thing that we have to keep in mind is that mutations always has to be synchronous. Okay. So now where do we do all those asynchronous stuffs then? So the asynchronous things that we would want to do in our application can be handled in our actions. Okay. So if we have to kind of like change anything asynchronously, that's where our action comes into picture. So in this application, if you were to look at it, obviously, I mean, what we have over here is that we have hard-coded the values of the products, right? So over here, the products are hard-coded over here. But the ideal way to do that is that obviously we are going to kind of like fetch this information somewhere from a server, right? So this population of this data that we are doing over here should ideally be a synchronous thing, wherein we kind of like we fetch the information from the server first, and then we try to populate our data out there. right? So that is something that can be thought of being placed in an action, or anything that involves some kind of like asynchronous call. Let's say we want to do something after 3 seconds, we want to do something after the timer goes off. So all those kind of stuff we can do within our actions. So the action in turn has to call the mutation to go ahead and change the state. Okay, so I'll just try to do that. So what I am going to do is we are going to run a fake server. Okay, so I'll just kind of like take off this data from here. So we have this products as an empty list now. And how do we want this to get fetched, or when would we want it to come? So whenever a component is getting created, that is the point where I would want this information to first get fetched from our server and then be populated out here. So out here, we can do that inside a created. And what do we want to do? We want to have that handler in our actions, right? So in our action, we can have a asynchronous method. Okay, so let's say fetch data, and this kind of like takes the gets the context of our state. Now, using this, we will want to kind of like go ahead and populate our data. Now, obviously, I'll just show you how you can run a fake server if you don't have your backend in place. But yes, you can do it via other methods just to kind of like try out whether your app is working correctly or not. You can simply kind of like hold it as an app.json over here and just try to fetch that data from there. But I mean, just for you to know that there is something in NPM. I mean, if you have used the node module before, we have something called as a JSON server, right? And if you look at it, what is it? It's just a fake server wherein we give it a static file and it's able to host that static file on some kind of server for us, okay? So I'll just show you how that can be done. So in here, I'm just running, I would just want to run that NPM server. So I've just, okay, how many of you have actually worked on Node module or on the Node.js?
Ma'am, I have used it to like write small scripts, like JS scripts.
Okay, so you are aware of it, right? So I mean, once we load our node.js, along with it comes our package manager, right? NPM. So through our package manager, we can kind of like go ahead and install any of the packages that we want. And it's telling over here, in order to install this JSON server, we have to do a npm install JSON server. So that's the only thing that I've done over here. I've just created a empty folder. Within that empty folder, I just ran a npm init. So that gives us a package.json. And once I got that package for JSON, I just simply installed this server over there, npm install JSON server. And in here, I have just created this JSON file. Okay, so which essentially you see is kind of like the product list that we had, right? So wherein we have the ID, name, and price, and so on. And once you install it, you'll see that it gets added to the dependency list over here. And just have written a small script over here. And what is it supposed to do? It's just supposed to run the JSON server. And it's supposed to watch upon this particular file app.json. That means take this information that's in here. And it can then go ahead and give that information to us on this particular port. So I'll just run this. So essentially over here, I do not have a DB, right? So I don't have a database. I'm just kind of like using this to just test out our application for now. But yes, in real apps, we need to still have our Flask API. We still need to have our database in place and all. So we'll just do a npm run, and I have named it backend over here, and that's why I'm running it as backend. Okay.
Ma'am, one thing I didn't understand. What is backend? Is it a file name or?
What does it say? Having an issue with the port. Let me just try to change the port number and run it again. Okay, so now we see that it is running over here. And we see that it's we have all that information out here, right? Um, so now we will, in our application, since we mentioned that inside our mutation, we cannot make asynchronous calls. So ideally, all these products and all, we would have to fetch from a server. So let's just go ahead and try to fetch it from here, right? So over here in our app, we have created this method called as fetch data. And in
Hello,
this,
Sanjita. Shall I just
yeah,
interrupt for a minute? I
yeah,
guess
sure, sure.
Rahul had a question regarding the scripts. That why are we running the backend only? Why not anything else? So can you just answer
You
that?
can name it anything that you want. I've just named it as backend over here. Okay, I basically want to run this server. I want to say that it has to pick up the information from this particular file, and it has to kind of like show it on this particular port.
Okay, okay. So that's the particular statement that we need to give a node to run the server.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we can do it. I mean, this is the easiest way I thought we can do it. Yeah, so we just do a npm run, and I can just give this name, and it will go ahead and do the rest of the needful instead of us having to type down the whole thing.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Yeah. So Sanjita, just shall I just add a few things?
Yes, please.
So I'm not sure means if you have used Vue CLI setup so far. Hopefully in the next session we'll be demonstrating something related to Vue CLI. So there also we use such kind of commands. Like if you need to see your app rendered, you usually use commands like npm run serve or npm run build, something like that. So I think this will get more clear once you will start using the Vue CLI setup as well.
Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
in case you have used your Python as well, right? Just the way that we have pip in Python, right, to install our packages. So with the Node.js, whenever we have to install our packages, we have to do a npm install. It just, and I mean, you can think of it in terms of like just the way we do a pip install, followed by the package name, a Flask or whatever. So over here, whenever we are doing it in a Node.js kind of environment, we do a npm install. And the npm server does get installed by default along with the Node.js.
So what it essentially does is it just runs the command that is written under that name. For example, what Sanjita has written under the name backend is that you basically have to watch a particular file on a port number this. So just that command would be executed, just that thing. JSON-server. So you are just trying to execute this command. If you want to run this command directly, you can do that as well.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Because
Understood.
you were mentioning something equivalent in Python as well, right?
Yeah, so in case means you are facing difficulties, for using this fake JSON server, you can always use Python HTTP server as well. I hope you all know how to start a Python HTTP server. You don't need to do much there. Just write a command python-m http.server. It will automatically start your server at a particular host. And whatever Sanjita is gonna write here, so she'll also be writing, making a fetch API call on a particular address, let's say localhost or whatever the port number is, you can follow the exactly same procedure using Python HTTP server as well. I think this was used in one of the screencasts as well. I am not able to recall the exact screencast name, but I think it was covered in Vue CLI, sorry, not Vue CLI, in the API calls screencast. I again need to confirm that, but yeah, in case you need a explanation on that, yeah, you can come back to us again on this course in case you are facing difficulties while doing the same thing with Python HTTP server. Right now, we will be using a JSON fake server just to give you an idea for such other things as well.
And this is just for demonstration purposes. It's not that you have to use a JSON fake server or you have to use this, but ultimately when you're creating a real app, it has to be a real backend and real things, right? So this is just to kind of like check out our app in a quick way. Okay. So now what we want to do, we want to kind of like go ahead and fetch the information from that particular server. Right, so I'm just creating a constant calling it as response. And what is it that we want? We want the information from this particular URL that we had out there. So I'll just mention that. And of course, since it's a asynchronous call, and I simply just want to kind of like go ahead and wait till we get the response, and then do our stuff further. Okay, so I'm just giving await fetch followed by that URL name. Okay, now we are just going to quickly check if that response has come back from that server. Then we want to kind of like go ahead and get our information from there. So if the response is okay, then what we want to do, we want to fetch our data, right? So I'll say a const data, and from this response, we will do a response.json, and of course we need to await on that as well. And yes, now comes the question, like how do we get that information till here again, right? How do we populate the products? So that means we have to call a mutation method over here. Okay, so we shouldn't kind of like directly change the state from our actions. So this in turn should call our mutation, a method in our mutation, and that in turn should change our state. So over here, let's kind of like have a mutation method. Let's call it as add data. And make this a capital D. And this is going to get state as one of its parameters. And straightforward, what do we want to do? We want to simply populate this products over here, because I have it directly in the same format, so we do not have to run through anything at all. So we'll just say a state dot product, and that should be equals to the data that we get from here. So I'll just write this first, and then we are going to kind of like invoke this mutation from our action. So once we have got our data, what do we want to do? We need to invoke this, right? So we'll write so what do we need to do? We have to just we get the context over here, and the same way we have to do a commit in order to call this add data, and along with the name we have to pass the data as well, right? So we will pass the data. Okay, so that is done. Now from where do we invoke this action? So what we thought is that we will have it in the created hook, right? So when our app is getting created, that is when we would want to populate our data. So let's just go ahead and do that. So over here, now how do we do that? So for this, we have to call something called as dispatch. So this dot state dot dispatch, and followed by what had we named it? Fetch data, followed by the name of that handler over there. Okay, so I think this should work now. Let's quickly try it out. Okay, it's not getting it. Something has gone wrong. Type error cannot read copies of undefined. Yeah. Such data only, right? Does anyone see where am I going wrong? Here we have start commit. What is the error here? Reading dispatch. Dispatch is reading actions only, right? Am I spelling anything wrong? Abhishek, do you see where am I going wrong?
Yeah, sorry, what happened?
It is saying that it cannot read dispatch. So where am I going wrong? So we have created method over here. So the created is
Okay,
calling.
this should be this dot store, not state.
Okay, sorry, yeah, this was store. Thank you so much. Add data is not defined. Add data. Okay, so why is add data not defined? Okay, I haven't given it within quotes. Sorry. Okay, yeah. So now the information. So if you look at a server, we have some 6 items over there, and if we look over here, all those 6 items have got added from the store out here. Okay, so I'll just kind of like quickly run you through again. So what is a store? A store, you can think of it as a centralized container in which we can maintain all our states and the associated methods for it. Now, in order to change the state, we always have to do it via a mutation. So we need to have a mutation method in order to change our state. And in case we have to do anything asynchronously, we should do that via actions. So when you look at a store, you are going to mainly have 4 to 5 parts in it. You're going to have your state, you're going to have your getters, you're going to have your mutations, you are going to have your actions. So in your state, you keep all the state information, like the data that we normally keep, right? Like the car total, the products in this case. In the getters, the information that can be derived out of the states, we kind of like tend to have those kind of informations in the getter. Mutations, we have methods which can be used for changing the state. So for changing the state, again, I mentioned we should always go via the mutations. And why? Because it allows our dev tool to record that, and it helps in debugging. Okay, so with this, I mean, every action that we take, wherever it's calling a mutation, we will see that that information gets updated over here, right? And if I kind of like refresh this app, it kind of like says that it calls this add data, that initial fetch that we made. And after that, whenever we go ahead and click on discounted price, so it's saying that it has called this mutation method apply discount. When we are going ahead and adding to our cart, it's saying that which is the mutation that it has called, and so on. And if at any point we see that things are going wrong, where it's going wrong, this dev tool does allow us to kind of like revert back on that mutation and go back and check out where things are going wrong. So that's why we should make it a practice to kind of like change our state through mutations only. Although it is possible that it can be changed directly through JavaScript. Okay, and mutations are always supposed to be asynchronous. And in case we have to change our state and it has to be done in a asynchronous fashion, then we have to have it within our action. So in our action, we can call our asynchronous method, and depending on that, we can go ahead and call our mutation, which in turn is going to go ahead and change the state. So yep, that's pretty much what I had to cover for today. So any questions, anything? Abhishek, anything that you would want to add, maybe?
I guess. Okay. Someone was asking something.
Yeah, I just want to confirm one thing, ma'am. You're still using Vuex 3, right? Not Vuex 4.
Yes.
Yeah.
So with Vue 2, it is our Vuex 3. Okay. So if we were using Vue 3, then that is compatible with a Vuex 4.
Yes, ma'am. Because when you began the session in when you showed the documentation, you were showing the documentation for Vuex 4. That's why I was asking.
Okay, did I? Okay, I didn't realize that. Okay. Okay, but the underlying idea still remains
Yeah,
the
idea is
same.
same. I just want to confirm because you just
No,
showed
this
it.
is
That's why I
still
was
Vue
confused.
2.
That's all.
Yeah, this is still Vue 2 and it's Vuex 3 that we have over here. Okay. So yes, any questions till this point of time? Or since we still have some time, we can run through the activity questions and practice questions. Any clarification that's needed in whatever we did today till here? Okay, so shall we run through the activity questions then?
Yes.
Okay, so let's do that. And
So I think
since
we can
yeah,
run through the practice, or sorry, not the practice one. I think we can run through the activity questions as you are saying. But
yeah,
let's just keep them limited to the lectures that are focusing on this Vuex and state management system. I guess there are some lectures that are focusing on PWAs and SPAs, and I feel it would make more sense if we discuss those questions once everyone has finished watching the videos.
exactly. So let's do that. Let's just do the view management part and the viewers part. So introduction to Vuex. Okay. So I can do this one, right? 7.2. Okay, so let's try to do 7.1 and 7.2. Okay, so since we have discussed, um, I would want answers from you all. So here's the first question. Which of the following statements is true for Vue.js? So Vue provides a progressive framework. That is, it can easily be used to integrate with an existing project and is incrementally adaptable. The single file system makes it, okay, is this for SP or was it for Vue? Okay, I guess we can have this. Not a problem. The so have you guys gone through SPA, single file component? Okay, so what do you think the answer to the first question is?
It would be all of the above.
Yes, it's all of the above. So our Vuex allows single file components. It allows our view routers, and all this kind of like makes it easier for us or for the application developer to create single page applications. And for single page applications, it's kind of like mentioned in detail in the lectures. But yes, in case of any doubts, we can cover it in more detail in our coming session. So the answer is D, all of the above. Now, the second one. So for a view application having multiple components, which of the statements are correct about passing information between parent and child? Okay, so what are the correct options? The first option given is events are emitted to pass information from parent to child. Should the first one be correct or it's wrong?
No, it's wrong.
Okay. So props are used to pass information from parents to child. Is that correct?
Yes, props.
Yeah. So whenever we are passing information from the parent to a child component, we use props. And a third option is childs can directly invoke parent functions and modify parent data.
Yes, that's true.
Okay. So it has to be B and C. Great. Now, our next question, which of the following are examples of state management frameworks? So just the way that we have Vuex for Vue.js. So these are some other frameworks that support it. So can I kind of like pick the correct one? Correct ones? So Flux, anyone who's ever heard of Flux? So Flux was a framework that initially, I think Facebook came up with for their state management. So Flux is one. Redux is a state management system used for React.js. Okay, so that's again obviously a state management framework. And NGRX. Any idea as to for which framework it's associated with? So for our AngularJS, it's NGRX. Okay. So
What was Redux the framework for?
Redux with React.js. It's a state management framework, just the way that we have Vuex, right, for Vue.js. Redux is for React.js.
Okay.
Okay, so those are our options. I should quickly check that. Okay, yeah. Okay, so we can move on to activity 7.2. So select the statements that hold true for the store in Vuex. So the first option given, there can be multiple stores for multiple components in an application. So is that true or false?
That's, I think, false. Only one store is needed.
Exactly. So for our entire application, it's only one store that is allowed, right? So we can have data, but yes, it's single tree structure. Okay, so you need to kind of like think of it as a single tree structure wherein we hold the information of all our components within it. Okay, so this is not true. Now, View stores are reactive.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah, that's true. Because whenever the state changes, all the components that are making use of that particular state, I mean, that information does get propagated, right? So we would see that information for all the components using that particular state. Now, the third option, the states in a store should only be changed through commit mutations. True, false?
Think true.
Perfect. So whenever we have to change a state, it's always a good practice that we do it through mutations. So usually we have to commit a mutation in order to change the value in a store, right? So that's what we did in our application as well. So whenever we had to change the price, we had to use a mutation method, apply discount. Whenever we had to add to the cart, we had to change this cart value. We went through another mutation, add to cart. And finally, whenever we had to populate this data also, right? So we had to do it through another mutation method. So, and in order to kind of like invoke these mutations, we have to commit them, right? So we use the this dot state dot commit to do the same. So, of course, that is a true statement. So it's very much required. Okay. Now, the final one, a state change should never be triggered using store getters. True, false. Yeah. Anyone?
Ma'am, I think it should be true, but I'm not sure.
Okay. So essentially, I mean, we should not, as a best practice, right? So we should limit ourselves to changing the state through mutations only. So getters, as we were saying, right? I mean, it's essentially to kind of like show. I mean, ideally, we can just pass the information that we have to. We are seeing in a state directly over here, or we can give some derived information of the state in the getters. Okay, so it's not ideally for changing the state over here. So we should avoid it. Okay, so it might be doable, but we should avoid it because of dev tool. If you look at this particular diagram, our dev tool kind of like keep a track of those mutations, right? So which through which mutation or through which method is the data changing. So if we want to have all our states in a manageable way, we want to keep track of things, it's best that we do things through a mutation only. So we can keep that as a false. So these two, B and C, would be the correct answer. Now, coming to our next question, which of the following can be used to access the state properties of a store? So, is it a store.commit, store.state, dispatch, getter? So, whenever we want to directly access the state properties, what do we do? Yes, I expect all of you to know this answer.
Store.state.
Yeah, great. Store.state, right? So whenever we want to get the information from the store, right? So any direct information, we directly use the store.state. Like that's the way that we were trying to get the information about the cart total. So store.state.cart total. Or we wanted the information on the products, right? So this dot store.state.products. So we use the store.state. But when is commit used? Store.commit, when we use that?
Commit is used for saving the state or changing it, mutating it.
Yeah, so in order to invoke a mutation method, right? So we have our mutations, and whenever we have to invoke that mutation, so apply discount is one of those methods that we have in our mutation. So in order to invoke that mutation from our components, we have to do a commit. Okay, so this dot commit is for the mutations. And dispatch, when do we use dispatch?
That is for a fetch request.
Yeah, so whenever we are calling those action methods, right? So whenever we have any methods inside our actions, basically the asynchronous parts, so that is where we use a dispatch. So whenever we have to invoke our actions, it's stored out a dispatch. Whenever we have to invoke our mutations, it is store.commit and store.getters, right? So to kind of like call these methods in here inside our getter and store.state, straightforward to get this state information out here, right? So our correct answer is then store.state. Okay. And yeah, our final question then. Which of the following statement is true about Vuex debugging support? So Vuex does not have a debugging support. Is that true or false?
False.
False.
Yeah, that's false because we do see that we clearly do have a debugging support, right? We have a dev tool out here, which keeps a track of all the mutations along with the timestamp at which it is happening. So that's a false. Next, we have Vue dev tools allow us time travel debugging. That's possible to retrace steps. So this is something that's called as time travel debugging. Okay, so if you see over here, it's giving us the timestamp. It's allowing us all those individual options to reverting back and things, right? So it does provide us with something called as a time travel debugging option. Okay, so that statement is a true. Now our third statement, Vue DevTools list all mutation requests, time of mutation, and which component requested for the mutation. Is that a true or a false?
Yes, true.
Yeah, it's a true, right? Because we're clearly seeing it over here. It's giving us the method along with the timestamp, and yeah, if we kind of like go ahead and see, it does give us all the information out here, right? So that's a true statement that we have over here. And the last one, the dev tool allow us to record mutations. So if you look out here, it does give us the recording option as well. Okay, so you can start recording, you can pause recording. So if you pause recording, you will see that if I do some changes over here, we will not get that information over here. Okay, so if I click on add over here, although yeah, so you are seeing that all that is not getting recorded. Although this value is changing, you are seeing that over here. So if I unpause this now and let's say we want to kind of like add this, now you see that that method gets added along with the timestamp and so on. So it does allow us the recording option as well. Okay, so in case you stop this, you will not see these things happening. You won't see all these logs being maintained and these timestamps being updated out here. Okay, so this is also a true option. Okay, so I think we have covered the view model and the Vuex part. So the rest
Simple,
you will
just
leave it,
one
right?
thing. Yeah, the
Yes.
first question, fourth option, state change should never be triggered using store getters. I guess this has configured as an incorrect option.
Okay, it should be correct,
Yeah, it
right?
should be true.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Okay.
so we need to change that. Yeah, so it should, I mean, this is actually a true option. Um,
Yeah, can you refresh this page? I have just made the change.
that's going right.
Yeah, you will have to refresh the page.
Okay. So anyone, any questions? Any questions, anyone? I think we have covered all that we had for today, right, Abhishek? Anything that you would want to add?
No, I guess, yeah, we are good. Okay, so I guess if there's nothing remaining, it's a good time to close this session.
Yep. So I insist that everyone goes through the videos once, and in case you still have any doubts or any questions, you can always get back to us on this course.
Okay, all right, yeah, thank you everyone for joining in this session with us. Okay, I hope when we'll meet again, you all would have finished watching the lectures for week 7, and hopefully we'll be discussing some things related to Vue CLI. Probably we'll demonstrate the Vue CLI setup in the next session that is scheduled on Saturday, coming Saturday. All right, then see you then. Have a
Thank
good
you all for
night.
attending the
Bye-bye.
session.
Thank you.